Welcome, everyone, to our 2024 series of ongoing OTF Connects webinars. My name is Peter Beans, and I'm honored to be your moderator today for today's session with Lyndsay, Buehler, and Jehan Lalor, entitled Junior Literacy, Tending the Fire. Before we begin, I'd like to do a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge first and foremost that we are gathered in the province of Ontario on the traditional territories of various Indigenous peoples who have been present on this land known as Turtle Island since time immemorial. We acknowledge that this has been a meeting ground for generations. We are grateful to the stewards and caretakers of this land. As advocates, teachers, and educators, we understand our collective responsibility to honor, protect, and sustain this land. We further recognize and honor within the membership of OTF those who are Indigenous to this land. This practice of recognizing the ancestral and traditional lands in which we work, live, and play is a concrete action that we undertake as a first step towards reconciliation between Canadians and the Indigenous peoples of this land. But it is not our only step. Collectively and individually, we must seek to denounce the injustices and wrongs that have been committed against the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, and to dedicate ourselves to cultivating and maintaining relationships based on mutual respect and truth. And with that, please allow me to introduce Lyndsay Buehler. Lyndsay is currently guiding grade 4 and 5 students, having rejoined classroom teaching after serving several years as a K-8 curriculum consultant. This marks Lyndsay's 17th year with the Waterloo Region District School Board. A crafter, musician, and avid notebooker, Lyndsay is on a mission to create endlessly and to read as widely as possible. In the classroom, one of Lyndsay's significant goals is to empower students to find both joy and agency through multimodal literacy. Now I'd like to introduce Jehan Lalor. Jehan is presently teaching grade 4 within the Toronto District School Board. Now in her 19th year of teaching, Jehan is widely recognized as both an educator and a traveler with a profound passion for picture books. This year, Jehan is focusing on critical literacy, foundational skills, and culturally responsive teaching as key goals within her classroom. And with that, I will stop sharing and turn it over to Lyndsay and Jehan.
All right. Okay, Lyndsay, we decided I'm sharing first, right?
So Jehan's going to get the
All right.
slide up there. And while she's
Yep.
pulling the slides up on the screen, we'll just say thank you for being here, looking out the window at a gorgeous sunny day at the start of a long weekend. So we do thank you for joining us live. And we thank you for all of the presents that you can offer us. When we think about being here as present as is possible for you, we really do appreciate the time that you are giving to us. We've had a lot of fun preparing this presentation, and I think we've learned a lot in the process.
Yes.
So we're calling this presentation Tending the Fire, Junior Literacy. We're thinking about in primary, when students are learning to read, that initial spark can take kids pretty far. And then we still have kids who are learning to read in junior, but as the skills progress, it's like to keep the fire going, we got to find the things that interest them or the new way to bring in their curiosity and the ways to build out those skills that exist. So the fire, we gotta put some more fuel in there and figure out how things are going. So we won't stretch that metaphor too far, but you may notice that throughout our presentation today.
There is a campfire theme. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Beautiful. All right. So just to echo Lyndsay, thank you for everyone for being here today on this afternoon. We appreciate you, especially on a long weekend. So thank you for being here. We're going to go over the goals for this session today. So what we are hoping to do is provide you with some ideas and resources that you might be able to use in your own language program in your classroom as early as tomorrow, fingers crossed. We're hoping to share some insight into our two different classrooms. So I'm in the Toronto district and Lyndsay's in Waterloo. So two different classrooms, two different boards. We're also hoping to learn from you. So to gather some insight from you as well on maybe what you're doing in your classroom as well and what different experiences you have. And then we're just hoping to connect. So ideas, people, curriculum, connect all together and share ideas and learn from each other. So that's our goals for this session. And tonight, what will we be talking about? We will be talking about how the new language curriculum has changed our teaching. We'll talk about what hasn't changed. And then we'll talk about routines and structures for whole group and small group instruction. So with that, I am going to ask Lyndsay this question. So Lyndsay, how has the new 2023 language curriculum changed the way that you teach?
Hey, thanks, Jehan.
All
Now,
right. Which, do you like me to stop sharing or do you want me?
You can see my screen, I'm hoping. Yeah, and then I will continue on.
I will stop sharing and all right, there you go, beauty.
Thank you. Oh, good. Okay. So my big thing that I have decided to put a lot of eggs in this basket for this year is morphology. And morphology is probably something that if you hadn't heard of it before this year, you started to hear about it with the new curriculum. Morphology simply is the study of the forms of words. Morph means form or shape. And it's the idea that words can come apart into little units of meaning, little morphemes, the smallest units of meaning in words, and we can put them back together or reassemble them in different ways and change the things that words mean. But we can also look at the parts and learn more about what those words mean as well. So I kind of think of it like it's the Lego of the literacy space, and that's fun and playful, and who doesn't love that? Jehan was kind enough to share this summary of Strand B in our new language curriculum and how it is organized and what we're looking at. And by highlighting all of the pieces that we're touching when we're going into the morphology routines that I'm just about to share with you, it became really clear that yeah, this is a good place to have, or this is a good basket to have all my eggs in right now, because it does reach over and spill over into so many areas of the curriculum. It's intrinsically linked to etymology, word origins, and orthography, spelling. And because we're learning in context, it just kind of makes it stickier, right? When we put all these pieces together. So I'm going to share some of the things that I've been doing in my classroom this year. You'll see the morphology wall behind me as well, or the morpheme wall. This is how I set up introducing things in my classroom. So before the year began, I made space where we could showcase prefixes, bases, which also later became bases and roots, and suffixes. And we started with one little pocket. And I thought, oh, let's start with calm. And we'll talk about community and how calm means coming with and together. And I was super pumped because I'd done lots of reading all summer long about morphemes and all the things they mean. So I kind of went into this with a bit of Toad-like energy, to quote from the book of Frog and Toad. Toad plants the seeds, if you don't know this story. And he's like, okay, seeds, start growing. And it didn't really happen that way. So I'm here to remind you that good things come to those who wait and persist with routines. And where I am at now with this in my classroom didn't happen automatically. And all of these routines were built out over time. So morphology wall behind me, also right here on the screen. How it's going, right? We have a lot more pieces that we have put together and looked at together, and you can start to see, if you look closely, some of those have student writing. Students are slowly taking over the morphology piece. There's even a game clipped to the board that a student made with some different morphemes together, which is pretty cool. This is the point where I remind you that this is being recorded, and you can always pause and play and go back afterwards, because I'm going to zoom kind of quickly through some of these pieces. But for those of you who like to take notes, I'm going to offer you 10 pieces of the routine, or 10 different little bits of routine that we do, plus a bonus. You're going to see all the words that are on the screen right now, again, stretched out over several slides. So the biggest routine and the primary routine is we kind of focus in on one morpheme or cluster of morphemes per week. And the goal is not to teach students every possible morpheme that there is out there. It's about developing understanding that morphemes exist and that we have tools available to us that we can use to help us figure out the meanings of words in this way, and how it can influence our understanding of spelling and all those pieces. So it's not about hitting them all. It's just about hitting the ones that make the most sense. So one morpheme per week-ish. I usually start with asking students to generate, because it's interesting sometimes the words that they pull out that I don't necessarily think of. So I'll provide them with a prompt like, what words do you know that contain the morpheme spect? And I'm going to provide all of you with the prompt right now. Hopefully some of you have your typing fingers ready. In the chat, would you throw out some words that have the word part spect in them somewhere? And maybe Peter or Jehan, do you want to call out what words we're seeing come into the chat?
Sure. Inspect, respect, retrospective, spectate, inspector, spectator, aspect, inspect, suspect, circumspection.
Ooh, circumspection.
I
Yeah.
was, like, I was looking at that one too. I'm like, whoa. Respect.
Spectrograph, spectacle, Spectacular, introspection we had already. Disrespect.
Disrespect, yeah.
And then as soon as one of those starts, sometimes then that motivates things like disrespected or disrespecting, right? And then we start to see all these different words that we can create by rearranging the morphemes. So often I do this in a think, ink, pair, share style, give students a little bit of time to think and write and share with someone else, and then they kind of have the confidence to share them out on the board. I often record them on the whiteboard as we go. And if students say something that really doesn't fit, I often record it too, because those, I like put them over to the side. Those non-examples can be helpful. If they say insect or intersection or speck, kind of pointing out why those ones don't belong in this morpheme family can help people understand what's going on. And the chances are if one student's thinking it, probably others are wondering about it too. This week I had a student stump me with, I've had students stump me twice this week with words, and I'm still working on figuring out one of them. And so if you're not sure whether something belongs, like I think kids love that more than anything. Like, whoa, we're making the teacher do some learning. So just, I put those ones off to the side and say, I'm gonna have to think about that one. I hadn't thought about that one until now. So after we've kind of generated all these words, sometimes I can elicit a definition of what do we think the meaning of the morpheme is. If it's something simpler like un or re, kids were pretty quick to name it. I would just probably be giving students this definition. Spect means see, observe, look, or watch over. I want to make sure we know that that part is clear. And then we talk about how does that make meaning out of these words? Respect. It's like I'm looking at you again, right? And seeing you in a different way. Okay. Shared reading is our next routine. And I provide a text kind of with the prompt, pay attention to the morpheme and how it's used. So when we read today, pay attention to that morpheme spect and how it's being used. Now, earlier in the year, I did not have access to the resources that I now have access to. So I was using poems that I would pull that, oh, that one has two that fit, or I would write a paragraph that I would try to squeeze as many words with the same morpheme into as possible. I'm now using a resource from Pearson called Bug Club Morphology, and we're using the grade 2-3 resource in our grade 4-5 classroom because we need to reach back to the pieces that we haven't encountered before, right? This is new for everybody, and it's working out really well. It is nice to have that ready-made text, but if you don't, we have AI. And this took 60 seconds to put this together. It took 3 different tweaks of the command. I used writer this time because I'd never tried that one before, so I wanted to. So you can see the prompt over on the side. Write 2 simple paragraphs for children about soccer. I have a lot of students in my class who love soccer that uses the root spect in a variety of ways. And then I added, include the words disrespect and suspect, just to kind of like spice it up a little bit. And this is the text I got. So throw a title on that, a couple clip art pictures, print that off, and you have a text that kids can mark up with highlighters and pencils, something they can take home to teach their family afterwards, right? Here's the morpheme spect and here's what I know about it. Really saved me a lot of time and actually pulled in some words in some ways that I didn't have the brain power that night to think about too. During independent reading is kind of the next routine. So once kids have seen this morpheme in context, then I challenge them to go find it elsewhere in context. When you're reading your self-selected novel or the articles that we're reading for science this week, look for this morpheme, watch for it in action. And again, sometimes they find non-examples of it in this moment, but that's really helpful to help distinguish there, which ones do belong and which ones don't belong and why. And then we kind of use that as a sharing point as consolidation at the end of a lesson or an exit ticket sometimes. Share the examples that you found as a ticket out the door. I happen to have a whiteboard on the door of my classroom, so sometimes we write them right on there as we're heading out. Or we create a sentence. If we didn't find one, we create a sentence with someone else's word that is up there. Next routine is really simple. Revisit that shared reading text. I am surprised with how much I'm finding that on day 1, it seems like some students aren't that interested in the particular new morpheme that we have, but on day 2, they have tons to share about it. And they're like confident in the knowledge that they're sharing. I would name this as especially true of my multilingual learners who've just had a little bit more time to get comfortable with that vocabulary. And this is a great way to practice retrieval as well. Our retrieval muscles bulk up with practice. Retrieval muscles bulk up with practice. So by calling students back to the learning that we did yesterday, we can really see what's sticking and just even practice that skill of drawing on memory. The next routine is super simple as well. It's using word lists and word equations. And here I have some word equations written out for you. So I would show students the individual morphemes, respectable, on the board, and then they write respectable on their little mini whiteboards. And I wanted to highlight this particular routine because it's quick. It's really simple. And when we look at words in this way, we can see how all of the readers in our junior classroom can access parts of this. Because when we break a word down into little morphemes, it's often single syllables at the same time, and we can decode those little pieces. So suddenly these are CVC type words that we are looking at, which is pretty cool. So respectable, inspector, and unsuspecting were built out on this page. Morpheme matrices is something that I have reserved until recently to add into the classroom as a new routine. So morpheme matrices, and these were found online, and they are free, and they are shared in the resources here. There are about 20 set up for you. They provide you with a root in the middle, and then a bunch of possibilities of prefixes, pieces that come before, and suffixes, pieces that come after, that you can put together to build words. And some of the interesting work that comes out of this is students are like, well, I think it has meaning. I'm not sure if this is really a word, or maybe did I invent something here, right? But this idea that we could put a word together and other people could know what it means, even if it's not an accepted word in the English dictionary just yet, is kind of fun. And finally, the last routine of my 10 is having students record a few examples in their word work notebook. So their notebook looks something like this. Unfortunately, the student pictures were too pencil-y and didn't show up. So here's what one student had written. They have 4 categories. They record the morpheme, the meaning, a little sketch that represents the meaning of that morpheme, and then a few examples of the word. And this is my shout out to Conrad. Yeah, you're here, but thanks for that idea of like letting students decide how much goes into their notebook. It's not like you have to do this, this, and this. They're kind of in charge of that and recording what makes sense for their learning. And juniors do like having that level of independence and authority over their own learning. This page, this slide, you're going to find in your shared deck, and it is all the resources and a few more that I talked about. So you can go back and take a look at these later and find a lot of ready-made things. So my +1 that I'm going to show you super fast here, this comes from the Morphology Project, which is out of Australia. These are ready-made slide decks that you can use in your class. So they're ready for the explicit teaching of here's the morpheme un. It gives you the meaning, not. I would go through these words, I would read, students would read, or a student would read, and we'd all echo back. So we put them up one at a time. Unfamiliar, they say unfamiliar. I read unfair, they read back unfair. This way, even if we're not at the reading skill point of being able to quickly decode all these multisyllabic words in front of the class, we're part of the understanding, and we're building vocabulary and putting together meaning of this piece here. There are a few word sums included. We talked about those already. And I didn't put that yellow piece in the slide. That comes with it, some little prompts about like, do we have any spelling conventions that we need to apply? And then we have a couple sentences. So here's 3 words. Which one goes in each blank? We just do this orally. We occasionally do it in writing, but to keep things at a snappy pace, we usually just call those pieces out. And then that's kind of the ready-made meal package. But to put a little hot sauce on it, I really hope this video is not going to play because I turned it off. Please, okay, good. I include something like a visual prompt or a short little video clip that has kids writing or talking to each other. So this one is, watch this little video. The kids open their, it's so cute. You're going to watch it later, I know. The kids open up their little cloche and find they don't have the same amount of cookies. And then we have these words down the side, who or what is unfair, unkind, unfamiliar, all of those things to build oral language and just help give context, right? To make things sticky. And my final little bit of words on morphology, because I know I've said a lot very quickly, is that I'm finding it's really helpful with decoding and encoding to have students able to notice these pieces at the beginning and end of words that they know. There's not much left in the middle to decode. And with encoding, to think about syllables, and often, not always, the syllables match the morphemes, and that gives them a lot of confidence with spelling these multisyllabic words as well. So yay, morphemes. Really glad I put all my eggs in that basket. And oops, there, I'm onto Jehan's slide.
That's okay, no worries.
Just like Toad in Frog and Toad, with a little bit of patience, the garden really did start to grow. And I'm going to pass things back to Jehan. So that's something that's happening in my classroom this year. Jehan, how about you?
Something new that I think I brought back now based on this, and let me share my screen, is, all right. Go. All right, let's go. Okay, so something that I brought back, when I started teaching, I was in schools, what we call in the Toronto District School Board model schools. And one of the strategies that they taught us to help with students' critical thinking was a strategy called RACER. And to be perfectly honest with you, I forgot about the strategy. It kind of went to the wayside over the years. And then when the new curriculum came out, this strategy came back to me because it's such a great way to help the students formulate their thinking and answer questions. And I noticed that in my particular class this year, we had a really hard time with that. I use the terms a lot in my classroom: level 1 thinking, level 2, level 3, level 4. And I was getting a lot of level 1 responses when I would ask them a question about a story or an image or a video that we'd read. And then I realized that they didn't have the tools to provide me with the level 3s and 4s that I wanted. So I found that this RACER strategy was a great one. Because it forced the kids, whenever I asked a question, the first thing they have to do is restate the question. And right away, I actually noticed that I had a hard time, or a few of my students had a hard time even just restating the question, which helped me to realize they didn't understand the question in the first place. So they couldn't actually answer it. So that was something that we'd ended up practicing a lot in our classroom. And then once they were able to restate, we practiced actually answering the question. Um, and making sure that we were actually answering the question. How do you know that you're answering what I've asked you? Prove it. And then being able to cite or give support answers with information from the text or their own thinking, making connections, and then extending their answer again with making connections to their own self or something that they've seen, and then basically restating what they said to have a conclusion. So in my class, the kids will get a template. They also, I'm fortunate enough that my class has Chromebooks as well. So they have a paper copy template, and they have their computer to use, where some of my students will use Google Read Write as a strategy as well. So I'm just going to show you a quick example of what one of my students did. This was one of the answers. We used Cassie as a assessment tool. And the question was in the story: why did the camel keep practicing her dance even though it made her feet hurt and her body ache? So this is a raw example of grade 4. This is what she typed out on the computer, and this is what she submitted. So she's using the strategy. She's saying the camel kept on dancing because, and then she went to the answer. I think she kept on dancing because she wasn't afraid to perform in front of people and really wanted to be a ballet dancer like the other animals. She cited the information, so she didn't give up, even though the audience were saying mean things like, "You are not and never will be a ballet dancer." And she put it in quotes to show that she was using evidence from the text. "And you're big and bumpy" again. And then she made a connection. "This reminded me of my fake friends saying you will never be good or better than me." And then re-summarized at the end. "That's why I think she never gave up." So our next step with this, when working with this particular student, is for her to write it in paragraph form. So now she was able to extract the information, extract and organize her thinking. And then our next goal was for her to put it in paragraph form. So that's something that we've been working on. All right. So
Jehan,
what hasn't? Yeah,
right. Sorry,
sorry.
I was just gonna say, I love how it's going back to something, right? Like something new can be something old, repurposed again, right? Maybe it's just the vintage shopper in me, but like 10 years ago that worked, and now I see how that works so well again. So those were some of our examples of things that have changed in our teaching and from recent years. Now we're going in to think about what hasn't changed. And so, Jehan, in your classroom, what hasn't changed?
What hasn't changed? I also just want to say that I love, Lyndsay, the morphology stuff, because that's something I know I need to incorporate more of. So I just want to shout that out because I really love that.
Cool.
What hasn't changed? So When I heard the new curriculum, I wasn't sure where to start, what to do. And as I flipped through it, I always try to look for things that are familiar to me. So the part about transferable skills, so critical thinking, problem solving, innovation, creativity, entrepreneurship, self-directed learning, collaboration, communication, global citizenship, all of those things, sustainability, that did not change. We've always been doing that. And now I just felt it was almost even more formalized. So to me, that was comforting because that's something that we've always been doing. So if you could indulge me right now, the critical thinking piece, I love to use different images and videos and quotes with my students just to get them thinking outside of the box. I found that at the beginning of the year, especially, my kids were very literal thinkers. So I'd ask a question, I'd show them a picture, and the picture would have multiple meanings, but they'd always provide me with the most obvious one, as expected. So what I have done throughout the term is give them a quote, give them different images, and the images you see in front of you are from Unlearn, and I love these. Um, and they've really helped my children to think, or my students to think in different ways. So if you could indulge me right now, because I know we've been doing a lot of talking, I would love for you to take a look at these two images. And as you're looking at them, choose one or both, whatever you choose. I just want you to share with us, what do you see? What do you think? What do you feel about these images and designs? And Lyndsay and Peter, if you don't mind reading responses in the chat, I would love that.
Sure.
Thank you.
Nothing yet.
All right.
That means we have a group of deep thinkers.
I like it. I like it.
We are all connected.
Thanks, Jody.
Oh, I like that. That's the tree image. Beautiful.
The roots of Canada are global.
Ah. Oh, I like that.
Things hidden beneath the surface.
Oh, wow. We do have a lot of critical thinkers, deep thinkers.
Be a leader, not a follower.
I like that.
Look beneath the surface at the roots of the idea or problem. Then can we apply it to the world?
Oh, wow.
Something that looks simple is complex. Don't
Yep.
be afraid to do things differently. Find your path.
Oh, I love that.
Do your own thing. Don't follow the pack. Make your own
Beautiful.
path. Try something new. Don't be afraid to swim upstream when everyone is swimming downstream.
I'm actually writing some of these down. These are really good. Thank you. I'm writing them down to share with my students. Thank you very much.
The big fish is the leader, but looking a different direction from their staff. Yeah, interesting. Yeah. What school are you in?
Oh, that's funny. Oh, thank you.
The world is connected in ways we don't always see.
Yes, that is also very true. Very true. Oh, beautiful. Thank you so much for your responses. And I'm not kidding. I'm actually writing them down to share with my students. So I really appreciate that. So this is an example of an activity that I will do with my kids, and we'll discuss and we'll talk about it. Something else that hasn't really changed in the curriculum is we always try to have our students' identity at the forefront of our teaching. So we always try to have books or images or things that reflect. And like I said, I'm a big picture book person. I love picture books. And a lot of what I focus on in my classroom is identity and vocabulary words that surround identity. So another thing that hasn't really changed in the curriculum is vocabulary building helps with comprehension. So something that we have been doing a lot of in my class this year as well is explicitly focusing on vocabulary words and building definitions together and with surrounding my students' identity in class. So with that being said, this is something called a Freyer model, and I'm sure many of you have seen it. And as a class, we took a look at the word identity. And as a class, we came up with examples of identity, and we came up with non-examples. And then we came up with a shared definition together. So as soon as I said to my kids, what do you think identity means? The first thing they thought of was identity theft and people stealing identities. So I said, okay, but what does that mean if somebody steals your identity then? And then they got into into the category of kind of personal identity. So your name, your age, your interests, your personality traits. So we listed that. And then a few of my students talked a lot about cultural identity. So the languages they speak, the customs, the traditions, the heritage. And then a few talked about their social identities. So when they looked at it, they talked about it like who were they amongst their friend groups in the case of when we were talking about it in class, and who are they amongst society. So some said, I'm my mother's daughter, I'm my brother's sister, you're my teacher, I'm your student. So that's who they were in a social context. And like I said, then they came up with their definition after. And then that kind of started our unit on identity and exploring ourselves. So this is just a blank Freyer model. My students also have a copy of this in their folders. And we also have it online as well, just for them to refer to, because sometimes we will do word work with it as well. And just to go into that, so a lesson that I do with identity and picture books and connecting, and again, trying to put the students at that forefront and making them feel like they belong in the classroom. These are some of just the picture books that I've used with the students in my classroom. And one of our culminating tasks that we do is something called an identity tree. So we go through these books, we use these books, and the great thing about these books is they lead to great discussions. So Beautifully Me, as soon as I held up the book itself, one of the students had said, "Oh, she's really fat." And then another student had said, "Well, I don't think she's fat. Why do you think she's fat?" And then there became this whole discussion on cultural differences and how some cultures look at fat versus thin or skinny. And I had shared with my students a story about that. When I was in Jamaica, my aunt had referred to me as fat, and I got upset about it, but I learned that that was actually a compliment when I was younger. So we talked about those discussions. The Girl Who Thought in Pictures was a great discussion on. That book is about a doctor who was born with ASD, and she develops this great farming system. And I had two students in my class who have ASD, and they were very excited to share about that and talk about how they have it too. And a few kids talked about their siblings. So these books just led to great discussions. Just in the classroom, and a lot of different ways of thinking and sharing and building community. The other one that was very popular in my class was The Proudest Blue, because we do have a few students who are, as they were telling me, they were deciding whether they wanted to wear a hijab or not, and the peer pressures and social pressures of wearing it, and they didn't want to stand out, but they were proud of their culture. So again, more discussions. And then another one was The Boy Who Tried to Shrink His Name, because we did have a student in our class this year with a very long name, and he shortened it because he was afraid we wouldn't be able to say it. So we talked about, we should be able to say your name, so let's practice your name. So he still prefers his nickname, his short name, but we all do know how to say his name. So again, books lead to great discussions. I try to choose books that are reflective of the students in my class. So that's kind of that. So culminating tasks that you can do if you choose to do so is we talked about identity trees. So this is just a short form of it, but we talked about the roots. So where you come from, your background. We talked about the ground. So the things that you do weekly just for you. And they had a really hard time with that. They kept mentioning things that their parents wanted them to do, not that they did for themselves. So I had to give them examples. Like I have a gratitude journal that I write in daily. So that's just for me. I don't do that for anybody else. I go to boxing once a week. That's just for me. I don't do that for anybody else. So once we shared those ideas, they started to understand a little bit more about what that meant. So some of them said they would write songs or write poetry just to kind of calm them down. Some of them said they would go for a walk with their cousin or their friends. That's something that they did for themselves weekly. They would visit their grandparents. So we talked about that. The trunk, your skills and values. So again, going back to vocabulary, what do skills mean? What do values mean? We came up with lists in the class of different skills and values. And again, went over that vocabulary. What does it mean? And then they would list their skills and values. We talked about the branches of the tree, so their hopes and dreams and wishes. And again, vocabulary, things that I assumed my kids would know, which again, my fault. I realized they didn't. So we always had to go back. What does hope mean? What does dream mean? what does wish mean, and then go into that. And everything was done. This was a long process. This wasn't we did this all in one day. So I would choose a book and then talk about one of like the roots, choose a book, talk about the ground that kind of reflected these different aspects of their identity. And we also talk about how your identity is forever changing. So this is where they are right now in this phase, but it won't always be like that necessarily. We talked about the leaves, the names of those things that are significant to others in a positive way. So those who are significant to them in a positive way. And again, we have to talk about that. So it could be they're an adult, a caregiver, their sensei, whoever. And then we talked about fruits and legacies. So the fruits, which is legacies that have been passed on to you. So again, we talked about the word legacy and what does that mean? And I gave a few examples myself. And then we talked about the flowers and seeds. So legacies you want to leave for yourself or for others. So the way I kind of phrased it to them is when you leave this earth, how do you want to be remembered? So I'm just going to show you a few examples from the kids that kind of tried to go with their different abilities. So I gave them a outline of a tree, and they could draw their own tree. They could do it digitally. It was up to them. So on the first tree, the paper template, the great thing about this was I actually learned a lot more about my students doing this activity as well, which helped me to kind of better cater to them in the classroom. So on the first tree, the paper copy one, the template, one of my students wrote that for her hopes and dreams, no more animal abuse, stop telling girls they are less. And then one of the things that really struck me with her, she suffers from extreme anxiety. She's in grade 4, suffered from extreme anxiety. And her wish for the world was she wanted no more anxiety ever again because she didn't want anybody to feel the way that she ever did. So it was nice for me to hear that from her. On the digital template, I had a student, and I didn't actually know because he's always so happy. He comes in very jolly and excited. And one of the things he wrote on his tree was, "I wish I could hold my grandma's hand one more time." And I hadn't realized that she just passed away a few weeks ago. So we talked about that, and that made me cognizant of just to check in with him every now and then as well. He also wrote, "I wish there was more peace in the world," because he can't understand why people just can't get along. And then he said his dream was he dreamed for a day that people were just nice to each other. And that was his hopes. So again, something that helped me to learn about them, got them thinking deeply about themselves and who they wanted to be in the world. For my kids who love to draw their own. So these again are two open-ended ones. So one student decided to draw her own. She wanted to make her own tree, which was perfect. And she wanted to be remembered as being loyal and hardworking and respectful. And then my other student who created his own digital copy tree, because I used to call him my tech genius. He used to do all my tech for me. He's amazing. He felt he got his kindness from his sister. He got his athleticism from his mother, and he was generous like his mom. So it was, again, nice to learn things about my students that way through this project. Something else, I did not do this. I am going to be stealing this, though. This is from somebody that I work with. Or I should say I used to work with. We're actually in 2 different schools now, but we share a lot together. She did identity cubes, which is awesome, which we're going to be using. Her goal behind it was she wanted to use cross-curricular, so a little bit of math. And I won't go too much into it, but some vocabulary that she did with her students. So this was done with grade 6. She talked about starting with their names, and we do a lot of work with the kids' names, but we talk a lot about that. And then talking about, again, building vocabulary on ethnicity, race, sexual orientation, abilities, religious beliefs, again, going over those terms and definitions with the kids and having them identify those parts of themselves and with whatever they're comfortable sharing, so that they can name these things later. So again, she used the outline cube template, and then the kids created their own. Some ways that she differentiated was some of the kids made a dodecahedron because they wanted to share more. So those are some of the things that she did as well. And let's see. And then these are just some of the examples of how they turned out. And again, I won't read through that too much, but you can kind of see how it turned out. And again, I know she learned a lot about her students from that as well. Okay. So with that being said, that's something that I did. And I know Lyndsay talked earlier about multimodal text. So I'm going to pull that up for you, Lyndsay.
Sure. Okay.
All right.
We got a couple of little animations on here, of course, Jehan, but if
Clicking through. There we go.
I'll have them up. Sure. So a few intertwined things that I would say continue through my teaching that I have, pulled from times past, and that I think the new curriculum makes even more apparent, which is awesome to me, is this idea of multimodal texts, and that being texts that combine different forms. So visual, audio, having sound effects in the background, even so far sometimes as having something tactile as part of your text, right? Combining these different pieces together is something that I'm even more excited about as technology has progressed too over the years too. It makes it that much more possible to bring into our classroom. And then intertwining that piece with this idea, which Jehan, you just spoke to so eloquently, of beginning from student interests and experiences. And the more we know about students and the more we learn about their identity, the more meaningful we can make this in the class as well. So in addition to knowing who students are, I've been really watching, what do they enjoy in the classroom? What are the kinds of texts that they're reaching for on the shelf, and what are they ignoring in my library? And how can we start from the things that are popular to get to the places we want to go? So graphic texts, graphic novels. I'm a huge fan of graphic novels. I'm sure that there's lots of folks listening in too. And my students are exactly the same. So I love sharing that with them. But then it was this idea of how can we leverage the piece that they're going to get more out of that. So we started with sketchnoting at the beginning of the year, and just these idea of simple representations of icons and where a picture can replace 1,000 words, right? And can stand in for that and make their text more meaningful for students who are still learning to read or who are learning English, and all of those pieces. Kind of was discovered by accident, how much students in this class were into it. I mentioned earlier that I used some poems as shared reading texts and to draw out morphology, but experimenting with this idea of shared reading. And my class was very impressed with that, to the point that my colleague across the hall was like, "What are you doing in there?" When they're all like chanting together. And it was poems that they found the music in. And they like this idea that how the words are arranged on the page tells me how I'm supposed to say them. So I have a small group of, I was going to say boys, but it's not all boys, who have just finished reading Kwame Alexander's Rebound. And actually, I'm second guessing the title. Anyways, they've just finished Kwame Alexander novel in verse. And at the end of every time when they got together to read it, they asked if they could get up and perform a piece, right? So it became a multimodal text because they're looking at it on the page and how it's visually represented, but they wanted to present it. So it is a text that lives in many different forms. And from these two passions coming soon in our classroom, combining them together and kind of stretching it further as we grow their learning, is video podcasting. We love YouTube. We know we got a lot of YouTuber fans in the classroom. So it's where we have access to video, and we are going to use that to bring in visuals, add sound effects, add background music if we should choose, combine different voices together to tell stories and to share interesting information from research that we've done. So that's kind of something on the horizon that I am looking forward to. And that makes me pretty excited about April, May, and June, to be honest. So that's kind of we've talked a bit about what we've changed based on the new curriculum, what we have continued or carried forward. And now that we've shared some of those glimpses into our literacy program, I think I speak for every classroom educator ever, that you get these new ideas and you're like, you go from the wow, that's awesome, to the how, right? It's like we go past that moment of like, that's so cool, I want to do that. And then you're like, how am I going to fit that into my day? Or how do all these pieces fit together? So we're going to take a little bit of time to talk about that with the question, partly what does whole group instruction look like kind of as a starting point of where the pieces fit together, and what routines do we rely on to make this literacy block happen? So Jehan, I think your slide is first with.
I am up. Yep, that is definitely me. We will go up. All right. So this is a copy of my literacy schedule, and I don't know how everybody else is, but mine is broken up by French. I also have periods where my kids will leave for various, I have a few students who will leave for various things. So that disrupts the period sometimes, but we make it work and we do the best we can. So I've kind of broken up my blocks into just to ensure that for me to focus. And you can see it on my schedule language. I'll have word study, we'll have shared reading, we'll have independent reading, shared writing, word study, independent writing, writing conventions, and then media. And we try to integrate as much as I can with social studies and science as well. So that's one of the ways that I try to integrate. One of the things that we do as well for oral communication is every Monday we have community circle in our group. So again, just a way to build community. So every Monday they know that's part of our routine. In the afternoon, as soon as we come in, we sit down and then we talk about, sometimes they'll want to share what they did on the weekend. I use something called One Story cards. So it's like a deck of cards and it has different prompts for the kids. So it will say, share a time where you felt successful, share a time where you felt you won at something, share a time where you're angry. And again, it just helps us to, we work on our listening skills and not yelling over each other. So it's that practical, just how do we respond to somebody's response, and how do we make sure that we're listening? So that's a part of our routine that's huge. Word study, I noticed as well, like in my class, that the students have a hard time attacking words with spelling specifically. So we've brought it back to kind of just going over the letter sounds and piecing sounds together and blending sounds, and just making sure that we know that C and H put together can make a ch sound. So word study sessions, we focus kind of specifically on that. That's very explicit teaching with that. Shared reading, I'll read a book to them. We gather at the carpet. We'll talk about, like, why do you think the author wrote this book? Whose voices are missing? Is there bias in this book? And then we just kind of go over the basics. Can we summarize the book? What's the main idea? What's the big idea? Independent writing, that's when I'll model for them during our shared writing, but then I'll send them back to on their by themselves to try it by themselves at their desk as well. And then we do reading groups as well, but as whole group instruction, this is kind of the routine of what it looks like in whole group instruction in our classroom. So that's kind of where we're at. All right, Lyndsay, ready?
Yeah.
There you go.
So I feel like I'm the teacher who won the lottery this year and got the schedule. Well, if you can see up in the upper right-hand corner there, that's my day 1 to 5 schedule. And those yellow rectangles, that's my language time. So period 1
jealous.
for 2 hours a day, uninterrupted time when they're fresh in the morning. And when that was handed to me, that was like, that's where language goes. That's easy. So my language block, how that 2 hours gets broken down is this anchor chart beside. And this took 2 months to establish in my classroom. This was September and October before this anchor chart was finished. And by the time it was finished, we'd spent so much time with it that I had some students stay in at recess to lovingly color this thing and put it together, and it lives up on our wall, kind of as the reminder of the day. We begin every day with a soft entry. And initially, it was just independent reading, but I provide other bell work such as writer's notebooks or a team challenge or a word challenge for groups at their desk. And during that time, I'm taking attendance and gathering all the papers, but I'm also pulling a small group most days for 15 to 20 minutes. And this is my, I got to see you every day to keep the momentum going, decoding group of 3 students in class. We're still working on letters and sounds and how to form letters and all those pieces. And we are making progress. And I love that we can get them when they're fresh for that moment. We gather together at the carpet to start a whole group lesson with an oral communications piece component. That whole group lesson is where my morphology bits that I shared earlier happen. Doesn't happen every day, but that it's at least 2 of them a week. That is a big component of that whole group lesson. Then we break off into purposeful practice stations, as we call them in our room. One group meets with me most of the time, and then we have other groups working on other activities. You can see later in the slide deck what they are. 20 minutes later, we share what we've been up to, randomly pull 2 or 3 sticks from a cup with kids' names on them and have them share what it is. So sometimes we're hearing a poem that somebody found that they think is cool, or hearing them read a passage or share some facts about the science topic that we're on. Sometimes it's just, I have students using Lexia and it's, I did this many minutes or I got this many units, and they're really proud of that. So it might be more of a learning skills piece that we celebrate. We quickly clean up and we move to our second round of stations. And it took a long time to tighten up these transitions, and we still have days when we need to remind folks of why we need to move quickly. Second round, another small group, a different station for everybody. Then we consolidate in kind of the same way, a quick share and cleanup. And that saves about 15 to 20, 10 to 15, let's be honest, minutes at the end of that block for a bit of consolidation and a little bit more whole group learning. And that might be a callback to the morphology. Hey, who found something in their book? Do we have some more words? Do we want to add something up here? Or if I haven't yet read aloud to my students at any point during that day, try to make sure that that's happening in that little piece there. So that in a nutshell is how 2 hours flies by every morning in my class. But having shared our schedules, the reason we're putting them in here is we would really love to learn from you.
So we would love, and I'm going to unshare. Are you able to put the link in the slide deck?
But I can drop the link in the chat.
Perfect. You mind doing it? Perfect. So we would actually love to see your schedules. This is one of those we would like to see how other people organize theirs as well. Or if you just love to share in the chat something about your schedule that you find great or something in your schedule that you find challenging. It's always nice to hear from other people to see, because I like to learn from other people's schedules as well. And I look at Lyndsay's and I'm super jealous of her schedule because I wish I had that amount of time. The broken up periods make it very hard, I find challenging, because as soon as you start, it's time to go. They got to get ready for French, or they're coming in for recess. It takes them a while. They need to eat their snack. So I find that challenging for myself. So Lyndsay's schedule, I'm jealous of, and we would love to hear about your schedules.
And Jehan, I think it's important that we highlighted both of those, though, because next year I might be, next year it's a different schedule, and you're like, now what do I do, right? Like, I've got this routine that I'm used to, so we accept the schedule that we got and we make it work, right? And so I appreciate seeing your creativity.
That's it. We just do the best we can with what we're given.
And we are coming close to the end of our time. So as folks are adding in, Karen, it makes me feel special that you're very jealous of my schedule, but I'll try not to brag too much.
Me too, Karen, me too.
Yeah. And we know teachers teaching French immersion and things face their own challenges of how they're making it work, but we would love to see some of those examples of making it work, or, put it in that slide deck with the any suggestions comment beside it, because sometimes we can rely on the network to have some brilliant ideas pop out.
We had a question come up about the smiley faces that were on your block diagram. What was that about?
Oh, I can pop ahead to the slide. Jehan, I don't know what slide it is, but do you want to just wing through to the slide that has the different anchor charts explaining some of the different stations? Because I think we're approaching our last few minutes where we're going to open it up to questions anyway.
Do you want this one or keep going?
Keep going.
All right.
It's just a lovely little speed preview, folks, of all the things that are in here. It's quite a few forward, actually. So it's the one, it shows some different small group stations. They're on my wall. You can see where they are in my classroom too, as Jehan tries to find these ones.
These ones?
Yeah, they're not always the same. So there's about 4 or 5 groups happening, but it's a smiley face because it's kind of a wild card. We have a writing practice station, a word work practice station. Now I'm pointing and they're on the screen. That's funny. Fluency practice, sketch noting, and another, I have a text set exploration one that we use sometimes as well. And then since we've been doing book clubs, sometimes students were doing independent book club work where they would gather together and read there. So these are very basic posters on the wall, just reminding students what tools you need to do this task and what the expectations are for that group of are you together, or is this something that you are by yourself and doing? So hopefully that sheds some light to how those stations look in the room. But again, routines make it easy so that we're not having to give directions over and over and over again, right? That it's familiar pieces.
Nice. Nicely organized.
Thanks.
Beautiful. Okay. Are we still going forward, or do you want me to move back and just talk about how we pick our groups, how the groups are chosen?
I think if we could give a teeny bit of insight into how we put those groups together, that's probably helpful. And then we can possibly move on to some of our questions that folks have here.
Absolutely. Perfect. Okay. So I'll be super quick. Going back, how groups are chosen. Sorry. So those are some of my kids in the TDSB. we have something called a phonological awareness survey. So with the kids, we try to get to as many as we can. We just kind of pull them aside. We go through consonant vowel blends, blending words together, and then we just assess them on that. So these are just some quick examples. I know it's kind of blurry and hard to see, but then we just check off and see if there's any issues. And then if there's certain kids that have, let's say, multiple issues with CVC words, I kind of, at that point, we'll put them in one group, and then that's something that we'll focus on when we get into our small reading groups while the other kids are working on something else. Sometimes I'll do it, like if I give them a Cassie and I notice they're having problems with summarizing, then I'll level them in groups like that, and I'll pull the group that is having the most difficulty with summarizing. I'll make them a group, and then we will kind of review how to do that. So the groups are always changing. And again, these are in the slide, so I'm not going to go through too much. These are my kids working on summarizing together. Going through. So independent practice. So how I kind of broken it up in my room is that there's usually a word workstation, an independent reading station, a composition, so a writing task, or a STEM or STEAM. But again, that can change as well. And right now we're just in the process of working on it independently. My class this year does have a lot of needs, so the process takes a little bit more time, but they're coming along and I'm really proud of them. When we are doing the centers, I try again to base it around a book. So this is an example of one that we did. So we used the story All Because You Matter. So the first station, the first group was working on writing a short story about someone who feels like they belong. And again, the pre-teaching to this is we gone over the story elements. Station 2, talking about nouns, verbs, and adjectives. So kind of select a short piece from the story, and they would find the nouns, verbs, adjectives, an identity collage. So students create collages that represent aspects of their identity. They could do that digitally, or they could draw, like blend it, cut things out and put it down. And then I'd have a group with me focusing on whatever the strategy is that they needed to work on at that point in time. And then as you see, Lyndsay's awesome stations, and moving on from there. Okay. So we would love to know what's something that you can take away from today's session. And then I think we also, any questions that you have. And then Lyndsay, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think that's great. So you can look at us relaxing here, Jehan, now in front of the
Yeah.
fire. We wanted to tell you, and they're like, and this is how we're heading into the weekend. So, yes, but if there is something big or small that you name today that you can take away from the session, first of all, it's a lovely gift to us. So we know some things that stuck or resonated, and also if we know if we name it, we're more likely to do it, right? Or if we write it down somewhere on a sticky note for ourselves right now, when we return 4 days later to the classroom, we might find that Tuesday sticky with some inspiration. So if you want to share those in the chat, or if someone's feeling really inspired to turn their microphone on.
Oh, that would be awesome.
Word equations. Yeah, something so simple can have a lot of power, I think, Jen, because it just reinforces how we're assembling things together to make something new, right?
Can we ask some questions while those are coming in?
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
One question was, how do you assess ML students using, or do you assess ML students using Cassie as well? How did they do, especially with written responses?
So no, I don't assess my ELL. So I do have some ELL learners that are brand new to the country, and I do not use Cassie to assess them. So to be perfectly honest, we have the ones that I have right now are currently stage 1. So they are very limited with their English. So right now we have the UFly books, or Flyleaf books. So I'm using CVC readers with them and just working with them through that. And then having them associate words with pictures and building their vocabulary right now.
Okay, another question. I had posed this in the chat. What do others think about, the identity cubes that were shown? What do others think about students secretly creating the identity cubes and then the other students guessing which cube belongs to whom?
Oh, that's actually a great idea. I've never thought of that. That would be a great idea, actually. I like that, because then that shows how well they know each other in the class. That's a good idea. I like that.
And then where do you fit
Thank
your
you.
assessment in during purposeful practice time during your soft start?
Both. So that person gave themselves a pretty good answer, right? Out of it, like a lot of that assessment, when you're in a small group, assessment's kind of happening as you're doing it because you just have that like up close and personal seat to what is happening. Yesterday, one of my small groups looked like this. It was train. So it's a small group of 7. So I don't know if you still define that as a small group or if that it's on the larger side. They were all sitting in a train. The first one is at my guided reading table. I still call it my guided reading table. And they were reading to me. I had a little conference with them. They moved to the back of the line. The train moved forward. Next person. And we got through 6 of 7 in the 20 minutes of time and had a quick little check-in on fluency and comprehension with, 6 of the 7 of the group in 20 minutes.
And I often have my Chromebook with me with notes open. So anything that I overhear while walking around or sitting with them directly, I'll just put notes right in my Chromebook at that time and I save it in a file.
Photos too. Call back the
Like,
remember this for later. Yeah. Or
yes, I definitely take photos of what I see as well and photos of their work as well. And I'll also add that in my slides as well so that I can refer to it later.
Next question. What are some other ways you use picture books?
I use picture books for a lot of things. So we use picture books basically not basically, but to go over kind of or explore the different the way I use them is to explore the different aspects of their identity. So we'll focus on like the one Beautifully Me, we focus on something like fat shaming, but then we connect it to media. So the kids might make a poster or a video about that. So going back to Lyndsay's, talking about videos, the next project our kids are actually going to be making is called What Brings Me Joy. So we're going to be talking about all the things that bring us joy. And again, using picture books and the images from the picture books to kind of help with that video, like help make that video as well. Often I will use images from the picture books just to get the kids thinking. Why do you think the author created this image? Why do you think, is there a better image that you could use? So I use it for a lot of discussion and really to focus on their identity. I don't know if that answers your question. Lyndsay, how do you use them in a different way?
I would add to that, like, I think those are like strong and solid ideas. And I would add to that too, it's an all can access text to talk about why authors write a certain way or how they do things. A lot of vocabulary instruction. If we can find a few keywords, like that's a great way to give it context and help students make sense of it. And for writer's craft too. We've just finished poems from, it's a book that's, it says it's for ages 4 to 7 called This Is How I Know. And it's the question of how do I know that the seasons are changing? It's a dual language book. It's in Anishinaabe and English. And so students have just finished writing their own This Is How I Know spring poems that will become part of our land acknowledgements every morning that we hear, where they're noticing things in nature outside and borrowing the style of the author, and then some poetry moves from their other poetry books that they've been reading as well. Mm-hmm.
Oh, I can add to that too. We definitely use picture books to create poetry. So the kids by the end will do a spoken word poetry again on their identity. So we did it last year and I noticed the kids really enjoyed it. So I used a book there called Hip Hop Speaks to Children. So we made some connections there with music, with beat, with dance as well, while they were performing their spoken word poetry. And then to add also with the vocabulary, I do that as well. So I'll model some words with it and then we'll clap it out in syllables. We'll see if we can spell it without me showing them the word first, if we can spell it together just to hear the different letter sounds.
We had a comment and a question. I'm a retired teacher, and one school I was supplying at last year had me test reading levels. The biggest thing I noticed in grade 5 and 6 classes was the need for morpheme instruction. I would give mini lessons after the test. How often do you get, the question is, how often do you get to work one-on-one with kids?
And Jehan, is it work one-on-one because their needs are so different from the rest of the class?
Jan, would you like to unmute and answer that?
I would say there's not too much that is, large chunk of time one-on-one, But I hope I mentioned somewhere in morphology, like students bring whiteboards to the carpet with them most of the time. And that's a great way to see what they're thinking. Or if they have a print copy of the text, they're breaking the pieces of apart. So like the one-on-one comes in the moment, right? Of like, they're getting the like, yes, that makes sense. Or I need you to check this part. Or can you say that sentence out loud? Do you have everything you need? So those one-on-one pieces are happening, but they're sort of rapid fire for anybody who needs it as the whole class works together on something.
I think that's what it looks like in my room too often. Sometimes while the kids are all sitting and working quietly, I will pull students aside individually and review concepts or review words or review different whatever they kind of need with them. But I wouldn't, I mean, I can probably maybe, to be honest, maybe once a day I can maybe meet with them quickly, but it just depends on how the class is that day. Hopefully that answers your question.
So any more content from the two of you?
We've got some other pieces in our slide deck.
Mhm.
We decided just to share it all and see how far we got tonight. I would say if there's anything, if folks are looking at that later and they're like, what is this? Or can we say a little bit more about that? If that's perfect timing, thank you to whoever just put up this slide. Send us an email.
No problem. You're welcome.
Yeah, we planned that.
100%, 100%.
But again, thank you so much for giving us the time to share these things and for sharing your ideas, questions, input. It's been a wonderful experience. I feel like I need to add that Jehan and I only met in August, really.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
and we only met in person in February.
yes.
Every time we get online to plan these things or talk about something, it's like, it is all about like, that's a cool thing. I'm totally doing that. Tell me more about this thing. I'm totally doing that. So it was nice to have that conversation publicly, but also to have the input of everybody who was participating as well. Thank you.
And just to echo, Lyndsay, thank you so much for your responses and your questions today. And again, your responses to those images were great. I've literally written them down, so I appreciate that so much. And just thank you for being here again on like this long weekend evening. I appreciate you taking the time to be here. So thank you so much.
For me personally, this was very interesting. And it's funny how we remember lessons from when we were a kid. And the whole morphology thing reminded me of Mr. Bond in grade 6. And I still remember that he taught us the word anti-disestablishmentarianism. And it's the
A lot of more. Sorry.
perfect word to study all the morphemes. So just for fun, while you were presenting, I went to Chat GPT and I said, break up the word anti-disestablishmentarianism into its morphemes. And the response was incredible. I mean, not only did it break it down, but it gave the definition of each of the morphemes. And then it gave a bit of a history. You know, actually, it defined it because, you know, the word for me, you know, as a kid was so convoluted that I never really did understand what the word meant, right? Even with breaking it up into the different morphemes. Refers to the doctrine or movement against the reversal or dismantling of an established state or organization, which, yeah, if I sat down and thought about it, yeah, I can probably come up with that. But then, particularly referring to the 19th century movement opposing the disestablishment of the Church of England as the state Church of England. So there was a bit of history thrown in, which I thought was very interesting. So it's a good way to integrate perhaps literature with history using examples like that. Very cool.